The cardboard sign trembled in his daughter's tiny hands as the afternoon sun burned down on the sidewalk outside the glass tower. 4 simple words were written in uneven black marker. "We need shelter, please." The letters were smudged where her fingers had tried to trace them, as if she could rub away the shame that came with holding them up. Cars slowed. People stared. Most walked past, and above them, the mirrored windows of the tallest building on the street reflected a world that felt impossibly far away from the cracked pavement where they stood. If you believe in kindness and second chances, take a moment right now to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel Deep Night Stories. Your support keeps stories like this alive, and you never know whose life they might touch. It was mid-morning in the heart of the city, the kind of bright day when everything looked polished and hopeful. Office workers hurried with iced coffees in hand, delivery trucks double-parked, street vendors called out lunch specials. But for Rowan Castillo, the sunlight felt like a spotlight exposing every failure he had tried to outrun. His shirt was clean but worn thin at the collar. His shoes had been resoled twice. Beside him stood his 6-year-old daughter, Mira, her dark curls tied back with a faded ribbon she insisted on wearing even when it no longer matched anything she owned. Just 3 months earlier, Rowan had been the proud owner of a small neighborhood hardware store he had inherited from his father. It wasn't glamorous, but it had been steady. He knew every customer by name. He kept a jar of peppermint candies on the counter for the kids. He believed in fixing things rather than throwing them away, but a sudden rent hike, combined with a supply chain delay that left his shelves half empty for weeks, had gutted his cash flow. When a large corporate chain opened 2 blocks away, offering discounts he could never match, the steady trickle of loyal customers turned into a drought. He borrowed to stay afloat. Then he borrowed again. By the time he realized he was drowning, the water was already over his head. The bankruptcy hearing had been swift and merciless. Papers stamped, assets liquidated, keys handed over. He had packed the last box from the store at dawn, pressing his palm to the worn wooden counter where his father had once stood. That night, he told Mira it was just a new adventure. She believed him because children always do. At first, they moved into a small motel room paid for with the last of his savings. Rowan applied for jobs everywhere, from warehouse shifts to delivery routes. He swallowed his pride and filled out forms he never imagined he would need, but interviews were scarce and the bills were not. When the motel manager knocked on the door to say their time was up, Rowan nodded with quiet dignity. He did not argue. He simply folded their clothes into 2 suitcases and stepped back into the world. Now they stood outside the headquarters of Valion Industries, a multinational corporation known for its cutting-edge technology and charitable foundation. The building rose like a monument to success. Rowan had not chosen the spot at random. He had once read an article about the company's CEO, a self-made millionaire who had grown up in poverty. It felt like a long shot, but long shots were all he had left. Mira's hand was small and her sign clutched against her chest when her arms grew tired. She did not fully understand what bankruptcy meant. She only knew they no longer had a bed and that her father's smile had become something fragile, like glass about to crack. Rowan tried to shield her from the worst of it, making games out of shared sandwiches and calling park benches temporary castles. But children sense fear the way animals sense storms. Inside the tower, Lysander Quinn stood in a corner office with windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. The city looked miniature from that height, like a carefully arranged model. He had built Valion Industries from a garage startup into a global empire over 20 years. Magazine covers called him visionary. Analysts called him ruthless. Employees called him demanding but fair. Few knew that at 8 years old, he had once slept in a car with his mother after his father walked out and creditors took everything. That morning, Lysander had been reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant hesitated at the door. She mentioned a man and a child outside holding a sign. It was not unusual. The city had its share of visible hardship, but something in her tone lingered. Perhaps it was the fact that they were not shouting or causing a scene. They were simply standing there, dignified in their desperation. Lysander stepped closer to the window and adjusted the blinds. From 40 floors up, the figures were tiny, almost abstract. Yet he could see the bright patch of cardboard in the child's hands. He told himself he had a board meeting in an hour. He told himself there were established charities to handle these things. He told himself that one man could not save everyone. Still, he kept looking. Down on the sidewalk, the hours dragged. The sun climbed higher, heat rising from the pavement. Rowan felt the weight of passing glances, some sympathetic, others dismissive. He had never asked strangers for help before. The humiliation was sharp and metallic in his mouth. But when Mira looked up at him and asked where they would have a room tonight, he swallowed his pride and stayed. Around noon, the glass doors of Valion Industries slid open. Security guards stepped aside as a tall man in a tailored suit walked out, flanked by aides. Lysander Quinn was not one for theatrics, yet today he moved without announcing his purpose. He approached Rowan and Mira directly, his polished shoes contrasting with the scuffed sidewalk. Up close, the contrast between them was stark. Lysander's watch alone could have paid a year's rent for a small apartment. Rowan's hands were rough and trembling slightly as he tightened his grip on his daughter's shoulder. He expected to be told to move along, perhaps threatened with trespassing. Instead, Lysander looked at the sign, then at Mira's face. There are moments in life when the past and present collide so forcefully that you cannot tell them apart. For Lysander, seeing that child holding a plea for shelter shattered the carefully constructed distance between who he had become and who he had once been. He remembered his mother's forced optimism, the way she would say everything was temporary, even when she had no idea how to fix it. He remembered promising himself that if he ever had power, he would use it differently. He asked Rowan for his story, and Rowan, though embarrassed, told it plainly. He spoke of the hardware store, of his father, of the corporate competition, of the mounting debts. He did not beg. He did not dramatize. He simply told the truth. Mira stood quietly, leaning against him, her sign now lowered. Lysander listened longer than anyone expected. Pedestrians slowed, sensing something unusual. When Rowan finished, there was no immediate grand gesture. Lysander did not pull out a checkbook on the sidewalk. Instead, he made a decision that would ripple far beyond that afternoon. He instructed his assistant to clear his schedule and invited Rowan and Mira inside. The lobby of Valiant Industries was cool and expansive, with marble floors and abstract art installations. Mira stared up at the chandeliers as if she had stepped into a palace. Boyle Wren felt painfully out of place, aware of every scuff on his shoes, yet no one stopped them. No one sneered. They were led to a private conference room where cold water and sandwiches were brought in. No one sneered. They were led to a private conference room where cold water and sandwiches were brought in. Lysander did not offer charity in the form of a single payment. Instead, he asked about Rowan's skills. He learned about the years spent managing inventory, negotiating with suppliers, repairing everything from leaky faucets to broken locks. He saw not a failure, but a man who had been crushed by circumstances larger than himself. Within days, Lysander arranged temporary housing for Rowan and Mira through the company's foundation. It was a modest two-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood, paid for 6 months in advance. When Rowan saw the keys in his hand, his knees nearly buckled. Mira ran from room to room, laughing, claiming corners for imaginary tea parties. But Lysander's help did not end there. He offered Rowan a position within Valiant Industries' Facilities Management Division, overseeing maintenance for several of the company's properties. It was not glamorous, but it was stable, with benefits and a steady paycheck. More importantly, it restored something Rowan thought he had lost forever, his sense of worth. The first morning Rowan reported to work, the sun rose bright and unapologetic over the city. He wore a new uniform, the fabric crisp and unfamiliar. As he rode the elevator up, he caught his reflection in the mirrored walls. For the first time in months, he did not see a man defined by bankruptcy. He saw a father fighting back. Mira started at a nearby public school, her ribbon replaced with a new one she picked out herself. She no longer held a cardboard sign. Instead, she carried a backpack filled with sharpened pencils and cautious hope. Lysander watched from a distance as Rowan grew into his new role, proving himself reliable and innovative. In quiet moments, he would recall that day on the sidewalk and feel a shift within himself. Success had once been measured in stock prices and acquisitions. Now, it felt different. It felt human. Rowan saved diligently, determined never to stand on that pavement again. He volunteered on weekends with the same foundation that had helped him repairing homes for struggling families. He understood their fear in a way few others could. On a bright afternoon nearly 2 years later, Valiant Industries hosted a community event in the plaza outside its headquarters. Booths were set up offering job training information, housing assistance resources, and free meals. Rowan stood at one of the tables, sharing his story with hesitant faces that mirrored his own from the past. Mira, now taller and more confident, handed out flyers with a smile. Lysander stepped onto the stage to address the crowd. He spoke not about profits, but about responsibility. He spoke about remembering where you came from. And as he scanned the plaza, he saw Rowan and Mira standing not as symbols of charity, but as proof of what compassion could ignite. If this story has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like, comment, and share it. Your engagement helps spread messages of hope further than you might imagine. Before we end, write in the comments the word shelter if you believe everyone deserves a safe place to call home. The afternoon sun bathed the plaza in golden light, the same kind of daylight that had once exposed Rowan's lowest moment. Now it illuminated something else entirely, resilience reborn. Mira no longer carried a sign asking for help. Instead, she held her father's hand as they listened to applause ripple through the crowd. Rowan felt tears gather, not from shame, but from gratitude. In a world that often rushes past quiet suffering, One man had chosen to stop. One decision had transformed despair into stability, humiliation into dignity, and a plea for shelter into a foundation for a new life. As the city moved around them, bright and relentless as ever, Rowan understood that sometimes the greatest wealth is not found in towers of glass and steel, but in the simple act of seeing someone who feels invisible and choosing to care.